In today's video, we're going to be talking about the upcoming pattern, talking about some climate stuff as well as a lot of areas are beginning to see their average temperatures drop actually starting around this time of year. So we're going to be talking about that descent that is beginning in many areas and kind of what to expect moving forward on a normal year. So let's talk about the tropics. We do see that storm still looping around into the Gulf. Still no word from the National Hurricane Center. According to model guidance, the chance of development is quite marginal, but it does exist. So I'd be surprised if we don't see any sort of at least like a 10% chance of development come from the National Hurricane Center. That would shock me. We do see them starting to indicate those eastern Pacific areas. I think that we're going to see a lot of action come out of there here over the next couple of weeks as their hurricane season is really beginning to get going. Typically, theirs starts a lot earlier than the Atlantic. So we're going to be discussing that as well as just the overall upcoming pattern, even talking about the temperatures, because I know so many of you have been asking about that. We've stopped doing it for a couple of weeks, and mostly that's because even if it's 10 degrees below normal, it's like, okay, is it going to be hot outside or is it going to be hot but not quite as hot outside? It's not as interesting this time of year because it's not as detrimental, and really you'll walk outside and not really feel too much of a difference in either case. So it is tougher this time of year to really find the reason to talk about it. But we are going to talk about it today because today is an interesting day, as I mentioned earlier, with the averages beginning to decline for a lot of areas. Let's dive into the tropics first, though. So here we are at the beginning of the GFS model run. I guess I'll kind of zoom us out just like that. That's perfect. And we could see a lot of this storminess arriving for Florida as soon as tonight into tomorrow morning. A lot of it crossing over into the Gulf here as soon as tomorrow night. So this will be 2 a.m. on the 24th Eastern time. We do see a lot of this storminess is around here near this kind of Gulf Coast along Mississippi, Alabama, Florida there. I'll switch this to white just so it's easier to see, but right here is particularly where we're talking about. And yesterday we saw the GFS model really want to show this area much further southward. It has trended northward even on this GFS model. So the European model and GFS model are in alignment with where they expect this system to go. And both don't really show too much in the way of development. Again, I still think inherently there is a chance, but we really see this one get more active as it's reaching approximately around Louisiana. Of course, that's relative because we have a large stacked column of storminess, some of it over Louisiana, some of it a little bit offshore, and then some of it a lot offshore. So it's hard to really know, like, is this the center of the system down here or is it up here? It's really tough to say, but regardless, we do expect some impacts for Louisiana. And as we just keep going, this one eventually does arrive for the Texas coast as well in the form of showers and some thunderstorms. Again, I do expect there to be an inherent chance of development just regardless with this one because it is a organized storm system moving into the Gulf, and we know how that goes a lot of the time. So I think that there should be a chance of development either way. We do expect this eastern I almost say Caribbean, but eastern Pacific area to get going, and we see a lot of activity here in this area that the National Hurricane Center is indicating there's a good chance of development. So we see that get going. This is by the 27th, so a good 5 days from now. And that one rolls towards the south of Hawaii, not developing too much. Really, the main concern is actually going to be this area here, a lot closer to Central America. That's just kind of going to ride along that area. We also see this one trying to get going here as well. We talked about this yesterday, but there's multiple areas of risk. And we see both of those start to swirl up and really get its act together. But that one closer to Central America and eventually well up into kind of along the coastline of Mexico, that one really gets going. And that is the biggest concern at this point. And this GFS model even has one following in behind it. Again, here's the original system. Here's a second one that's really starting to get going. So the Eastern Pacific is really, really looking active over the next couple of weeks. And oftentimes people don't talk about these ones as much because they usually have much less impact to land or to people in general as the Atlantic ones. But it's still very interesting and important to some people to talk about. So let's go ahead and move over to some of our model guidance over on Weatherbell real quickly. We'll talk about those averages. I really want to talk about those climate averages in just a minute, but we're going to talk about the storminess first. And we can see really our main thing is this cluster of storms here around for the southeast. We see from North Carolina through South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida here, a lot of it happening also offshore of those states. And again, we do expect an overall progression towards the northern Gulf here, and that's where we really expect it to just kind of sit around for a while and generally move across. So let's see what happens as we move towards tomorrow afternoon, where this one is still really impacting Georgia and Florida, and also that kind of northeastern Gulf area. We do also have a lot of storms around for the plains, both the northern and central, and then the upper Midwest there. So this is going to bring numerous thunderstorm threats to that area. We have a slight risk of severe weather as well there. For Thursday afternoon, we see that a lot of our system is more organized across the more north-central Gulf here. Again, bringing impacts to states like Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida still. As we keep on going towards Friday here, afternoon of the 25th, we do see this one beginning to get its act together even further. We do see more organization there as it's approaching Texas or Louisiana or somewhere in between both by the 25th. This is only 3 days from now, so this is well within the 7-day range that the National Hurricane Center covers. So again, I'm pretty amazed that there's not at least a 10% chance of development of this one, because I think that the chance of seeing this one become like a tropical depression or something is far greater than a 10% chance. Would I say it's 50-50? Absolutely not. But probably something along the lines of 20 to 30% chance in my mind of seeing this turn into something. So it's pretty surprising, to say the least, to see them kind of just ignoring it. We do see the plains into the Midwest, Great Lakes, Ohio Valley, Mid-Atlantic, Northeast, plenty of thunderstorms around. As we keep going towards Saturday, that system kind of absorbs here into the coastlines of Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas there. Continued activity for the Midwest, Ohio Valley, Great Lakes, and Mid-Atlantic. We keep going towards Sunday the 27th, and the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast gets a lot more active. We do have some storms around for North Dakota and Minnesota, but really just some scattered and isolated stuff around the nation outside of that. Moving forward a little bit here towards Monday on the 28th. Again, we get little clusters here, but nothing crazy to discuss. Tuesday on the 29th, we do have a low up here, way up in Canada, a secondary one down here closer to the United States, and some activity dragging underneath them. I think that this could bring with it some pretty healthy thunderstorm chances. By the time we're reaching Wednesday, the 30th here, we do see a very interesting jet stream pattern setting up here that is mostly descending as it moves eastward. It's a pretty soft descent, but it is there, and we definitely see the peak of it over the west. This could be the beginning of a positive PNA type pattern, which really just means warmth and high pressure along the western areas of North America. And in turn, we see a lot of this kind of cooler air that's being forced further and further northward in the west. It gets forced eastward and starts to spill over into the east. It's a pretty classic pattern. We've seen it a lot this year, and we see it in full swing effect here on this model run, Thursday the 31st. Also, for this time of year, we obviously have a really nice, warm, humid push coming from the Gulf. So when you see this cooler air getting forced in, you get this squeezing effect. And when those two air masses get squeezed, it creates, well, a frontal boundary first off, and we know what happens in those, but it creates rising air. You imagine like pushing, I wish you could see me right now, but like I'm pushing my hands towards each other. That force obviously lifts things up. When we imagine like the surface, it obviously can't go lower. So it has to go higher up. And that rising motion is what creates a lot of these bad thunderstorms. That's simple meteorology 101. But we see a lot of activity forming along this boundary because of that. Lots of thunderstorms in different areas along that line. We also see quite healthy amounts of thunderstorms here in this more warm, humid sector as well. I want to keep going, though, towards Friday on the 1st, and that squeeze is being forced further southward, which, for one thing, indicates that the cooler air is the more dominant air mass. So it's actually forcing the warmer air further southward, likely enhancing this positive PNA effect happening out west. Most of it will spill to the east, but some of it probably towards the west, further amplifying this pattern. Again, pretty large cluster of thunderstorms for the plains. A lot of activity in the southeast as well. As we keep going towards Saturday on August 2nd, still very cool in the east, much warmer out west. And by cool, I mean cooler, of course. It's still going to be hot, just less hot, as we mentioned earlier. We keep going towards Sunday on the 3rd. A lot of this activity much more exclusive for the deeper south locations. Same thing for Monday the 4th, with the exception of the plains and Midwest. Some activity wanting to sit in that area here over the course of this model run. August the 5th, August the 6th here, and that's the end of the model run, but we do get a slowdown from a lot of our peak storminess that we see when that squeeze occurs. We really lower down into a much quieter pattern after that's all said and done. I did want to show you guys an interesting tool here. This is the probability of tropical depression according to the European ensemble model. And again, it is picking up on this area in the Northern Gulf that we've been discussing. So I'm not just by myself and thinking that there should be a chance of tropical development. Also, the European ensemble model is fully on board with there at least being an inherent chance. The more purplish shades is going to be your 10 to 20% chance of tropical depression. The blue shade after that, which we see in a lot of these areas, is going to be your 20 to 30% chance. And then this is your 30 to 40% chance. So, I mean, it goes along kind of, I'm thinking like 20 to 30, but definitely this model. And this is taking into consideration what percentage of its members, because it is an ensemble model, which means that this is taking like 30 different models and making a mean average. But when we use the tool this way, it's telling us what percentage of those ensemble members are showing at least a tropical depression here. So about 30 to 40% of them do show that, which I think is very interesting. I think it does warrant, again, at least a 10% chance from the National Hurricane Center. We'll see what happens. Of course, I still think that the odds of it developing are less than it not developing, but it should have a chance. It should have a chance, in my opinion. It's not a huge deal, but I think that it should. Looking at the total precipitation, we still expect the plains, Midwest, Ohio Valley to be quite active. Of course, these areas seeing this Gulf slow mover will see more precipitation as well. Looking at the anomalies, we see that these areas average more precipitation. We talked about this for a long time yesterday, but the heart of those highest totals do get above average amounts. But even some of these areas that were pretty high in the total precipitation numbers are still below average because they just average so much this time of year. Whereas the upper Midwest and northern plains average a lot less precipitation. So it's much easier to get these above average amounts, especially when it's nearly equal to what the Gulf is seeing down here. Your average is lower, so the above average mark that the precipitation needs to hit is much lower. Now, as promised, we're going to talk about the temperatures here. So quickly, here's how the past 20 days have gone, which is going to be almost all of July, minus 2 days. If I could look at the 22-day period, I would, but I cannot. It's between 30 and 20, and I don't feel like including 8 days from June into our July number, so we're just going with this. But we do see an overall warmer stretch for a lot of the West has occurred. The more immediate coastal areas have been a bit cooler. The South Central states have actually been much cooler. Texas and Oklahoma, we know they've had a lot more precipitation than normal. That kind of moisture and cloudiness can lead to the average temperature just dropping. And I think that's mostly what we're seeing there. And then the eastern states have been pretty healthily above normal here as well for pretty much all of July so far. Very interesting. Here's the upcoming temperatures. We're going to discuss this. But before we do, I wanted to talk about the averages because I don't really have any graphics to show you about it. But here in Hampton Roads of Virginia, where I'm from, southeastern Virginia, if you don't know what Hampton Roads means, our average temperature, the peak is 90 degrees. The peak of the year is 90 degrees. And that lasts for a good 2 or 3 weeks. I think from like July 2nd all the way until July 22nd. So yeah, about 3 weeks, 20 days or so. And then between July 22nd today and July 23rd tomorrow is when we begin our descent. It's a very, very slow start for almost everywhere. I'll explain that in a second, but we are going to drop from 90 degrees being our average to 89 tomorrow, which is, it marks the beginning of that descent, which is really, really interesting. Now, of course, I could go through the whole nation and try to look up each individual city, but that's incredibly difficult to do to figure out when your exact drop date is. So I use ChatGPT, kind of try to add some, ask some questions in there, try to get somewhat of an average. And the consensus that I could come up with is that some point around the 21st would be like the actual national average, but it does vary greatly. Mostly the eastern states begin their descent much earlier, and then a lot of the western states, especially the immediate western states like the California coastline, Oregon, Washington, areas like that, it's well into August when that descent begins for you guys out west. We're talking mid-August to even, I think it was San Diego or San Francisco. Their descent doesn't begin until like mid-September, which is much, much later than the central or the eastern states. The central states are slightly later than the eastern states with that beginning of that descent, but not too far behind. The West is a huge exception. So the national average comes up to something around now. And it's a very slow descent at first. I was looking into my local area at least. And typically, now that we've gone from 90 to 89 being the average, that 89 degrees is going to last all the way until August 2nd. So we're looking at another 2 weeks. Not nearly as long as the 3 weeks that we were under the peak temperatures, but it is a very slow descent, obviously. 90 to 89 is hardly making a difference. It's only cool to a weather nerd like me, really. And then what's going to suddenly happen is after the 2nd, we're at 88, right? So from the 83rd for about a week or so, maybe 10 days. So it's getting shorter and shorter. And then you go from 88 to 87. And that one might last 7 days. And then as we reach into September, and this goes for most everywhere in the central and eastern states, it starts to drop a lot more rapidly, like 1 degree every 5 days. And by the time you're reaching mid-September, it's probably going to be a degree every 3 to 4 days. And then we stick with that all the way through until January when you reach your peak lows. So we are technically, and I know it's a long story and probably only like 10% of you are even interested in that, but to make a long story short, this does mark the official descent, which is cool to somebody like me, like I said, but it is going to be a slow start to that descent for another month, and then it's going to kind of continuously accelerate in that decline, and that's when things begin to drop really quickly in the mid to late September timeframe, and beyond. So just thought that was interesting. A lot of people, think that the peak, I always hear people act like August is the hottest, and of course it could be. We're only 1 or 2 degrees lower on average, so if you see a huge heat wave in August, it might end up hotter than July, but really for most everywhere, late June to late July in general is your peak temperatures, maybe even late June to mid-July being the peak, and then that descent begins sometime at the very, very end of July. Just wanted to educate you guys on that. I thought it was super cool. And the coolest part is really I thought about talking about it today, and I didn't even know that today and tomorrow was actually the day that descent begins for my area. I went to look to see when it would be so I could tell you guys the exact time, and it just so happened to be today to tomorrow. So really cool. Thought I should talk about it. But let's go over the temperatures that are upcoming here compared to that normal that we were just discussing, which is interesting because as we begin this descent, this happened last year, but we'd be looking at like average temperatures, let's say, for instance, in mid-August, and then we'd be talking about the long range and saying, oh, it still shows average temperatures for mid-September, but how do you explain that that's 7 or 10 degrees cooler by the time you're looking like a month out? So we have to keep in mind that descent because it definitely impacts these things. We do have a little bit of cooler air in the east here and also the west with more warmer in the central, which funny enough is pretty much the opposite of what we've seen the previous 20 days. That doesn't last too long. We see the warm air really move into the east here from the 25th in just a couple of days, and that lasts well into like the 30th. So we're talking about a good 5 days of really, really hot temperatures coming up. But what subsequently happens afterwards, and this is the European ensemble model, so we're getting a pretty good opinion here, is some warming out west. There's obviously some cooler air, but mostly warm. And we get this really, really cool air mass moving in for the beginning of August. And it might bring some really, really decently cool temperatures. That lasts all the way through August 5th. So a pretty long time into the pattern. That might bring lower 80s, upper 70s to some folks. Maybe a little bit of a sneak peek at the fall temperatures. I love those late summer cooler days because I'm always itching for like it to just feel nice outside. Like just really room temperature. really comfortable, really fall-like, and I'm really hoping we get some of those days coming up. But things are about to change a lot. We've gone from ascending all year long, and now again we're like at the top of the roller coaster, just about to go down the hill. And we're going to do it together every single day here on the channel, so be sure to subscribe because we do upload every single day. You can even hit the bell icon for daily notifications when we upload so you never miss one. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy it, leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.